Welcome to the Megyn Kelly Show. I'm Megyn Kelly. We covered the Bryan Kohberger sentencing on Wednesday. You guys remember that. And the families of the victims finally had the chance to address their loved one's killer in person, face to face. What a dramatic day. Throughout the emotional victim impact statements, Kohberger showed no remorse whatsoever and offered no explanation for the murders of Kaylee Gonsalves, Madison Mogen, Ethan Chapin, and Xana Kernodle. He is now at his new home, the Idaho Maximum Security Institution. Here is his new mugshot. He looks miserable. Let's hope he really is. Since the sentencing, we have learned a lot of new details from the unsealed documents around this crime, and we wanted to bring that information to you. Don't miss a moment. Subscribe to this show on YouTube and follow me on Insta, Facebook, and X. Since President Trump was sworn in, his administration has made enormous progress at a breakneck pace. But don't forget, while they're moving mountains for the good of the nation, you've got your own personal savings to worry about. And one of the best ways to look after your savings is through diversification, particularly with gold, like from Birch Gold Group. In the past 12 months, the value of gold has increased by 40%. OMG. Central banks continue to bolster demand for gold by buying in record quantities. Global instability and tension is high, and Birch Gold makes owning physical gold extremely easy. Easily convert an existing IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in physical gold, or buy some to store in your home safe. Just text MK to the number 989898, and Birch Gold will send you a free info kit on gold. There's no obligation, just useful information. With an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau and tens of thousands of happy customers, take control of your savings today. Text MK to the number 989898. I want to start by saying I've got some questions about what the Idaho cops are saying. I really do. I'm not entirely sure what's going on here. And I'll show you what I'm talking about. So they had a presser right after the Kohberger hearing on Wednesday happened and finally answered some questions, which they haven't done at all. And the first one related to, do you remember when the crime first happened, they put out a statement saying this was a targeted crime and that the community in Moscow, Idaho did not need to worry? And everyone had questions like, well, how do you know that? You don't have anybody in custody. You don't have a suspect. So how can you speak to what was in his head, that it was targeted? Like, what are you talking about? And that question came up on Wednesday. Watch here in SOT 80.
Chief, from the very beginning, your department was saying this was a targeted attack. Can you now say who was the target and what's your evidence to show that?
I'll turn that question over to the investigators to answer that one.
Well, I think Darren and I have, the evidence suggests that there was a reason that this particular house was chosen. What that reason is, we don't know. We don't know who the target was, and we're not going to speculate on that up here today. But we can tell you that for whatever reason, Mr. Kohberger chose that residence. Perhaps it's the location, layout, we don't know. But that's, to the best of my knowledge, that's what that statement likely led to.
Okay, that is a chicken shit remark. I'm sorry. That is ridiculous. That's a CYA cop right there. That's what's happening. They said it was targeted, I assume, because they wanted to keep the panic level down. But sorry, that's not your job. Your job is to tell the truth. If there was reason to panic, then you need to let the community know that. There was a killer on the loose who just murdered 4 people in the span of 12 minutes. And you had no business saying that it was targeted and like suggesting people didn't need to worry. Kids did need to worry. We had no idea in those initial moments and days who the killer was or whether he was going to target somebody else. I get it, you were trying to lower the temperature, but you had no information that the temperature should be lowered. You really didn't. They've never spoken to it. They've never explained themselves. And now here we get this guy saying we said targeted because we knew he had targeted that home. Bullshit. That is not what happened. That's a lie. I'll tell you that right now. That was an obvious lie. He's saying we knew he targeted the house because his car was casing the house, both in the hours before the murders and for weeks and months beforehand. So yeah, he had his eyes on this house, but that's such a ridiculous cop-out. How do you know it was the house, sir? How do you know it wasn't Madison Mogen inside the house? Or for that matter, Xana Kernodle? You don't know. You're just trying to say it was the house to justify that you said targeted in the beginning before you knew anything. And by the way, you didn't know that his house had cased the joint when you said that. You had no idea it was even a white Hyundai Elantra when you were making those statements. So this already is kicking it off on the wrong note. This is not full transparency, in my opinion. In my opinion, that cop lied to cover their asses for saying the wrong thing right at the beginning. I'm sorry. I realize the cops ultimately did a good job in finding the truth on this, but I'm not willing to go along with lies when they're staring me in the face. And I think you guys know that about me. Then came another one that I've got questions about too. And this related to the online crime forum into which a personality that was going by the name Papa Roger entered. And we talked about this a bit on Wednesday, but many people believe that Papa Roger was actually Bryan Kohberger weighing in on the crime under an alias. We talked about how in his criminology classes at DeSales University, when he was obtaining his master's, they studied a killer, a mass killer named Elliot Rogers. Pretty sure that's right. And Roger, and that he had killed girls on campus with a knife, that he had targeted a couple of girls from Alpha Phi, which was the sorority Kaylee Gonsalves was in. And there were other similarities between the two. He was an incel, which Bryan Kohberger is believed to be, involuntarily celibate, very angry, misogynistic against women. So there were some parallels. And then the questions that Papa Roger was asking very much seemed like they could only be known by the killer. In retrospect, he raised the question of the knife sheath. They must have found the knife sheath. He said that before we knew they found the knife sheath. Who would know? He was saying because they seemed to be like referring to a long blade knife, they must have found the knife sheath. What? Who would know that? Who would say that? And there was so much more. I'm gonna show you there was a documentary that's been hitting Amazon Prime. It's on Amazon Prime now, called One Night in Idaho. And in there they interviewed one of the two women behind this crime website. And she went through some of the similarities, some of the eerie questions that Papa Roger was asking on her website. Okay, here's that.
People ask questions on this page and they like, oh, I think so-and-so did it. But he was so into like the crime scene and like the killer and why he did things. In hindsight, I see something very much along the same lines as the questionnaire that Bryan Kohberger created for a school project. He wanted like the thoughts and feelings into why somebody committed crime. Papa Roger asked on our page, how did the killer leave the scene? Kohberger asked, how did you leave the scene in his questionnaire? Papa Roger said, did you clean up at all? Bryan Kohberger asked, before leaving, is there anything else you did? The questions on his questionnaire are very similar to the questions that Papa Roger asked on our page. One post in particular that really catches my attention is his very first post on November 30th. Of the evidence released, the murder weapon has been consistent as a large fixed blade knife. This leads me to believe they found the sheath. That is so odd because we didn't hear anything about the sheath. This has never been discussed publicly. This is November 30th. This is a full month before they even arrest him.
This too came up at the presser on Wednesday with the same cop who gave us the nonsense about the house was targeted, and listen to what he said.
There was a social media account that surfaced that has long had speculation that it was Bryan Kohberger. Can you talk at all about the Papa Roger potential connection, if any?
Right. There was no connection. There wasn't at all. We looked into every bit of it. We took a deep dive into it. We researched it. We utilized. It was not.
There was no connection. By the way, it wound up being his partner standing next to him who took the question. There was no connection. We took a deep dive into it. There was no connection. We researched it. We looked into every bit of it. We took a deep dive into it. I've got questions here too. Well, then who was it? Because it's knowable. You can trace the IP address. Why didn't he say, we connected it to someone else? Truly, like, how do we know it wasn't Kohberger? I guess at best they couldn't prove that it was Kohberger. That seems to be what he's saying, that there was no connection, none that they could prove. But what's to have stopped Bryan Kohberger from going to some random public library, not logging in with his real name or credentials and posting in a website? Like, how do we know? Maybe he did it at a place where there isn't a camera. Maybe he got some sort of a burner phone that had internet access on it. Like, I have no idea how he did it, but how are you ruling out that it was him? The only way of ruling it out that it was him is to identify it as belonging to somebody else and to have spoken with that person and then to know that that person has admitted he was the poster. I did not hear that. And the guy scurried off cam. Again, it could be true. I've got real questions, you guys. I just do. And they've been so cagey about releasing any information for so long that I got to be honest, I don't really have full faith in this police department. I'm not saying they didn't come up with great evidence. It was kind of right there for the taking, but I'm not sure about how forthright this police department has been with us from the beginning. Never mind the DA. There's more. Somebody asked, because you may remember that Kaylee Gonsalves' sister, Olivia, when she did her victim testimonial at the hearing on Wednesday, among many other powerful and memorable things, she said to Kohberger something to the effect of, where's the second murder weapon? Where's the second weapon you used? And now we have some idea why she said that. This is my own speculation, to be clear. It's because we've gotten more details on the murders themselves, and in particular, what happened to each of the victims. And Kaylee Gonsalves in particular was absolutely just brutally murdered. I mean, they were all brutally murdered. You know what I'm trying to say. Her injuries seem to have been extra in the severity and amount. This has just been released from a document. This isn't from the presser, coming from the police department. They said that both Madison Mogen and Kaylee Gonsalves, you remember they were found in the bed together. It was actually very sad. Madison was found, they said she appeared to be laying up against Kaylee. Madison had, this is Madison, not Kaylee yet, but Maddie had what appeared to be wounds to her forearm and hands. So clearly, looks like Maddie did wake up and fought, tried to save herself. Maddie had a gash under her right eye, which appeared to go from the corner of her eye to her nose. And just for those of you picturing this at home, you know, Maddie's the one who had the yellow sweatshirt and who just, you know, she was constantly smiling. Her eyes were like a little bit more like squinty. She looks a lot like Kaylee, so I'm just trying to give you the visual if you're listening to this. And there's a picture for those of you who are watching it. That's Maddie Mogen there. So she appears to have woken up. They said there was a gash underneath her right eye, which went from the corner of the eye to her nose. So he was obviously slicing at her. But then they got to Kaylee in these documents, and they said Kaylee, quoting here, was unrecognizable, as her facial structure was extremely damaged, according to the report. Both Maddie and Kaylee were stabbed in the lung and the liver. Gonsalves also had 2 brain bleeds and a stab behind her clavicle, which cut the vein and artery. A brain bleed would suggest a trauma to the head, that she'd been hit in the head in some way. She had over 20 stab wounds, as well as injuries connected with asphyxiation and blunt force trauma. Blunt force trauma. Kaylee Gonsalves is the only victim who suffered blunt force trauma, blunt force, and asphyxial injuries, in addition to sharp force wounds. And then I'll go on with the other injuries in a second. But Kaylee had particularly devastating injuries, and they were extensive. They did eventually give a number on the stab wounds, which poor Steve Gonsalves wanted so badly that he was calling Howard Bloom to try to get them. 34 stab wounds of Kaylee Gonsalves, many of the wounds said to be on her face. So she suffered blunt force injuries. She was stabbed 34 times, and she was asphyxiated. And what they appear to be saying is that she fought. I mean, she fought heroically for her life, and that he hit her with something, blunt force trauma. He hit her about the head. She suffered 2 brain bleeds, and then it appears he strangled her. I don't know whether that happened before or after the stabbings, but that's extremely dark and upsetting, and can only think just how brave of Kaylee to try to fight that hard against somebody who was armed with a knife and she had nothing. And her sister Olivia accurately said if you hadn't attacked her in the middle of the night like a pedophile, she would have kicked your fucking ass. That girl probably knew a lot more about those injuries. And one of the questions she asked Kohberger, I think as a result of all that, she knew at least some of it, though clearly not the number of stab wounds. What was the second weapon you used? I'm sure she's surmising that those injuries to her sister's face and head may have been caused by some sort of an object. So that question came up at the presser the other day, and here's how that went. Take a listen here.
Is it possible that there was a second murder weapon used, not just the knife?
Is it possible? All the evidence shows and tells us that he used a knife, a K-bar knife, and that's a weapon we believe was used to commit all the murders.
Here?
It sounded like the Gonzalez family said that there was a second weapon that was used on Kaylee Gonzalez. Can you confirm or deny that?
Out of respect for the families, that's something that you'll have to get from them. If they wish to share that with you, it'd probably be through them, not through us.
What? Once again, they're just not being transparent. I'm not a cop on this case, and I can easily say the amount of injuries to Kaylee Gonzalez suggested that she was attacked in a particularly acute way that involved something other than stabbing. That would be my speculation on why they're wondering if there was a second weapon. A question we've asked ourselves too, but have no proof of. Hello, it's not that hard. I'm sorry to be so hard on the cops, guys, but this is really frustrating. Am I feeling it too, or am I being too hard? They got their guy. They got their guy, but this just feels like not the fully transparent press conference we were owed once the gag order was lifted and the guy had been sentenced, pleaded guilty and sentenced. I expected more. And you can see, by the way, they both keep looking at each other like, you take it. And they can't step away from the microphone fast enough. It's like, this is just, as with the rest of the ending of this case, very deeply unsatisfying. Okay. There was a question about whether Kohberger did in fact have any connection to the girls or Ethan or the roommates or anybody in the house via social media. Watch.
Greg Fisher with CBS News 48 Hours. Was there any evidence that Kohberger was following the social media of any of the victims?
So, trust us, we wanted that to be the case. We've looked for a link, and we have not found one. Not one.
Yeah, through the entire investigation, I think that's something that we need, that you want, is to help to understand this and say, well, what's the connection? What was the link? And so we had every resource possible, and we worked that tirelessly, both from everything from his side, but all the victims and all the members of the house from their side. So we have never, to this date, found a single connection between him and any of the 4 victims or the 2 surviving roommates.
Now, that is very interesting, and I believe him there. And it does undercut some reports we had heard late in the case that possibly he had followed one or more of the girls and possibly had liked a post here or there. They still don't know. Steve Gonzalez watched Bryan Kohberger escorted out of the courtroom yesterday, still not knowing when the beginning of the end was. That's what he said he wanted. I want to know, when was the beginning of the end? What was the first contact you had with my daughter or one of her dear friends that led you to come into their house and do this to them? I understand the need to know that. We still don't know. Cops don't know. The best speculation I've heard is that possibly he saw Maddie in that vegan restaurant she waitressed at. I mean, it's just a little too coincidental that he's this diehard vegan and she was a waitress in a restaurant that was vegan. And there was some speculation, including on Dateline and other sources that have been spot on in this case, that Maddie was the intended target, even though the cops wouldn't say it there. And keep in mind, Kaylee wasn't even supposed to be there that night. So the guy, Kohberger, showed up. He went right up to the third floor to Maddie's room, which was clearly hers. Her pink cowboy boots were in the window. And it appears was surprised. There's Kaylee on the left and Maddie on the right, and was likely surprised to find Kaylee even there. And unfortunately, she was, the victim of circumstance, and so were Xana and Ethan. Not that being the intended target is any better or less, you know what I'm trying to say. So yeah, anyway, that's what appears to have happened. I believe he probably met or saw Maddie at that vegan restaurant and developed a fixation with her because she was everything he couldn't have. She was beautiful. She was vibrant. Her mother, I believe it was Maddie's mother was saying, the irony of all this is like, if you had just talked to her, she would have been nice to you. And the sister definitely said that about Kaylee. She would have been nice to you. Like, she was such a cool person. Both of these girls were so sweet. Like, she probably would have made you feel better about your awkward, inappropriate conversation. That's what Olivia, Kaylee's sister, was saying. And I believe that. Every account about these women, you don't hear like she was catty, she was petty, she talked about other girls, she had a lot of enemies. It was like they lit up the room when they walked in. These girls were everything Bryan Kohberger desired and couldn't have. And he needed to snuff out the beautiful life inside of them to make himself feel like something, like he mattered. That's as close as we're ever going to get. So we're learning more about all these roommates too here. That's Xana on the left, that's Dylan on the right, and in the center are the 4 murder victims. The 2 surviving roommates flanking the 4 who were killed. Kaylee on the bottom, Maddie up top, Ethan standing, and Xana on second to the right with the darker hair. Here's some more details. This is disturbing. I guess I should have said that at the top before I read what happened to Maddie and Kaylee. Forgive me. But here's some more that we've learned from the around 300 documents that were released, though they say that potentially thousands will be coming. So there's going to be a lot of updates in this case, as there should be. There shouldn't have been the gag order there was. I know some stuff has to go under. I mean, of course, to make a criminal case, but like, it's just ridiculous what a lid they kept on everything, gagging the family members. That was so inappropriate. And by the way, yesterday or Wednesday when I watched the hearing and I listened to Steve Gonsalves and I heard some of the details, all I could think was, I'll bet you it was Steve Gonsalves who cooperated with Dateline. He's been appearing on Dateline. The Gonsalveses have. They didn't appear in that One Day in Idaho documentary. Probably the way it works in TV is you cut an exclusive deal with somebody and then you can't do another one. But it was curious he wasn't in it because he's been so outspoken. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I don't mean to impugn him in any way, but I'll just bet you that Steve Gonsalves knew some things from law enforcement and shared them with Dateline because he was incredibly frustrated that nothing was getting out there. And I bet he did want people to know. And he didn't jeopardize the case. In fact, look, cases go to trial all the time with a lot of the evidence having been shared with the jury pool and with the public. That's what voir dire is for. So you can find the jurors, and there are plenty of them who have not been infected by all that stuff hitting the Gen Pop. It happens all the time. They get screened. Sorry, what do you think happened with Diddy? Like, we all saw so much of that evidence. Who didn't see the CNN tape? Like, anyway, I'm off on a tangent. Let me keep going. They reported that in these papers that the kitchen door of the murder house, 1122 King Road, was ajar when officers arrived, and blood was smeared on the walls and the floors, coating the 4 college students' belongings and pooling by their bodies, which were in different areas of the house. It was smeared on the walls and the floors. I don't know how it got smeared. I don't really want to think about it, to be honest with you. I think about like Xana Kernodle, who he appears to have attacked just outside of her bedroom or possibly in the doorway of the bedroom, but he was leaving the first 2 murders when he encountered her awake, and I don't think he bargained on that. We learned that he drove his car, it appears he drove his car away from the murder house for a couple of minutes around 4 a.m., and that's when her DoorDash came, her food. It's possible he didn't know anyone in that house was still awake, and he'd been sitting there for over an hour, probably just waiting for all the lights to go out. In any event, I don't know. Did she try to drag herself back to Ethan? Did someone try to drag themselves? I don't know why there'd be smearing of blood, or possibly just a hand on a wall as the girls fought or someone fought. It's just so awful. Some of the victims who were stabbed multiple times, quoting here, were covered in so much blood. Officers responding to the home at first were not able to sort out what their additional injuries were. In other words, they were so bloodied up they couldn't see. For example, it sounds like in the case possibly of Kaylee, how bad the beating was that she took, or maybe in the case of Maddie, that she'd been stabbed or sliced across her face as well. There was just so much blood. And you know from Howard Bloom's reporting, and he's had good contacts on both sides, that, and when we saw pictures, that the house was dripping blood on the outside. There was blood dripping on the outside. It was like the house was bleeding. There was so much blood. And he wrote of the police officer who felt he could smell blood. He walked into that house and it was such a bloody murder scene. He could smell blood and felt sick. Okay, they said, I think this is from, let's see, quote, "I was unable to comprehend exactly what I was looking at while trying to discern the nature of the injuries," one cop wrote in the newly released files. Unable to comprehend exactly what I was looking at. I talked to you about what they found in Kaylee and Maddie, both stabbed in the lung and the liver, and then also Gonsalves, Kaylee, with 2 brain bleeds, a stab behind her clavicle, which cut the vein in the artery, had over 20 stab wounds. Now we know it was 34, as well as injuries connected with asphyxiation and blunt force trauma. Kaylee was the only one who suffered blunt force trauma and asphyxiated injuries, they said, in addition to sharp force wounds. Xana Kernodle, who was killed, we believe, 3rd, the police say. He went up to the top floor, killed the first 2, went down. Xana and Ethan were sharing a bedroom on the 2nd floor. Had defensive knife wounds on her hands. Again, not surprising she was awake. And remember that we heard Dylan, who was the surviving roommate who would see him later, said she heard something like whimpering and him saying, a male voice saying something like, "It's going to be okay. Like, I'm going to take care of you," or something. Give me the team, please, producers. Give me the quote. But she heard him say something like, "It's going to be okay." And obviously then he killed her. It's just so brutal. This poor young girl, 21 years old, she must have been absolutely terrified. Like, think of how terrified Dylan Mortensen was when you heard her testify on Wednesday. She's still living with the terror of that. A year later, think of in the moment, this young girl in her home, standing face to face with a killer in a balaclava mask, dressed in black, holding a bloody knife. I mean, it's just unfathomable. And they said Xana had defensive knife wounds on her hands. It was obvious, say the police, that an intense struggle had occurred. Oh. Kernodle's fatal injuries were stab wounds to her lung and her heart. She had over 50 stab wounds, mostly defensive. That poor girl, she fought to save her life. And amazingly, it seems like somehow Ethan slept through it. Maybe the fight was down the hall. I don't know, but he appears to have been stabbed and killed in the bed that the pair of them were sharing. Still on Xana here, they say police found her lying on her back in her blood-stained underwear and shirt with defensive knife wounds to her hand, including a deep gash between her index finger and her thumb on the left hand. Both her shirt and her underwear were covered in blood. Xana's face and body were covered in dried blood. According to the coroner's report, Ethan Chapin's fatal injury was from a stab wound under his left clavicle, which severed his subclavian vein and subclavian artery, and also his jugular. So he took care of Ethan. I mean, I don't know. There's nothing in here about carving. That was reported by Dateline, that Ethan's leg was carved. That's not in here. I don't know whether it's because that was untrue or they just didn't include it. The coroner determined that the murder weapon was not serrated, like a jagged edge. It was a single-edged, very sharp weapon, and concluded that a lot of force was used. It's just the brutality of it. I mean, poor Xana Kernodle, 50 stab wounds from this guy that, is obviously bigger than she is. He's got all the advantages, who's running high on adrenaline from these murders he's already committed. And she's there in her underwear, drunk, I think, from having been out with her boyfriend. I mean, no one's prepared. It's not like you're in a dangerous place and you're on alert and your fight or flight instinct is there. The line she allegedly uttered, as heard by her roommate downstairs, not that she uttered, that he uttered and she heard, was, "It's okay, I'm going to help you. It's okay, I'm going to help you." I suppose that could have been Ethan, but it sounds like Ethan was asleep. There's more. When investigators canvassed the Moscow area to see where locally, if anywhere, the killer might have bought the knife, they visited numerous sporting goods and hardware stores to no avail. We now know he bought it on Amazon. Then at Walmart, while perusing knives on display, the Walmart employee helping Kohberger said that about 2 to 3 weeks ago, or helping the cop, said that about 2 to 3 weeks ago, a white college-aged male asked for a black ski mask that would cover his face. She was unable to provide much detail other than he was taller than she was and maybe had a tan skin complexion. And then she told him they only had camo ski masks available, and he walked away. Was that Kohberger? We believe he got the knife on Amazon. Did he look for the balaclava ski mask at a Walmart? And did this particular employee see him and deal with him? He doesn't have tan skin. Just one of the leads they appear to have been trying to track down. Investigators also spoke with Kohberger's fellow students at Washington State University. This is new. A fellow teaching assistant said the two discussed that Kohberger wanted a girlfriend, and they discussed that on many occasions. Back to the incel theory. Kohberger also liked to discuss his area of study, which was criminal decision-making and burglary-type crimes. The student also told investigators about some injuries he witnessed on Kohberger's face and hands. And while he was unsure of the date, he thought he had noticed the injuries on 2 separate occasions in October and November 2022. The murders were on November 13th, the wee hours of Saturday into Sunday. One was a large scratch on Kohberger's face, which the student described as looking like scratches from fingernails. The student also saw wounds to Kohberger's knuckles on 2 separate occasions, and when he asked Kohberger what happened, he replied that he had been in a car accident. Well, we had not heard about any car accident. Can we put the picture on the board of him in the white shirt the morning of the murders? I mean, we've done a lot of speculating over this picture, but it's very interesting. Now, this person who was apparently both a PhD student and a TA, just like Bryan was, had a talk with him and had seen him and suggested wounds on the knuckles. You will notice in this picture, only the left hand shows the thumbs up. The right hand's not visible. And he's showing the knuckles, and they're fine. I mean, I'm assuming he was right-handed, as the vast majority of the populace is. It is possible he had marks on the other hand and on the knuckles. I remember we all looked for those on the cross-country trip back home with his father. Didn't see much, but that was weeks after the murders. I think at least 3 weeks after. I don't know about you, but if I have a bruise, it goes away faster than 3 weeks. And he's a lot younger than I am. I don't see any scratch on his face. You can't quite see the left profile over by the ear. And let's face it, he's so white here, it's possible the guy's wearing makeup. I actually wondered about that before because he looks bloodless. He really looks like a vampire. And it's possible he wore makeup. And it's possible he was covering up a scratch. And you know what, guys? It's possible he took this picture not fully in celebration of his dastardly deed, but as proof he didn't do it. You know, in his mind, oh, I was just like taking a thumbs up. It was just a random selfie. It didn't mean anything. And maybe he thought this was a way of showing he didn't have marks on knuckles or face. And maybe he was clever enough to use makeup and to hide the right hand. It's an interesting question. Bethany Funk, who is the other surviving roommate who was in the basement and really heard nothing. She gave a testimonial through a friend at the hearing on Wednesday that she slept through the whole night. She woke up at 7, we know that Dylan ran into her room around 4:30 because Dylan was scared in her own room, not knowing what to do, and that she texted with Bethany. They got themselves freaked out, and Dylan ran into Bethany's room. But then it sounds like the two of them went to sleep, and Bethany, through her friend, testified that the friend reading her statement. She woke up at 7 in the morning. She had a toothache. She called her dad, who's a dentist. He told her to take 2 Advil. She did. She went back to sleep. But Bethany also described to investigators an unnerving incident early in November 2022, that's the month of the murders, that she recalled Kaylee Gonsalves had told her about. Bethany talked about an incident with Kaylee, who stated about a month earlier she had seen an unknown male up above their house to the south who was staring at her when Kaylee, took Murphy, the dog, out to relieve himself. Kaylee had told everyone about it, and she even called her roommates to ask if they would be home soon, according to Bethany. Dylan Mortensen also weighed in, saying there had been lighthearted talks and jokes made about a stalker in the past, and that, quote, all the girls were slightly nervous about it being a fact. Just 9 days before the attack, the roommates came home at 11 a.m. November 4th to find their front door open, loose on its hinges as the wind blew. Concerned, they grabbed golf clubs from one of the first-floor bedrooms and checked the house for a possible intruder. Gonsalves was away for the weekend. Bethany Funk told police in her interview that Xana Kernodle's father came and fixed the door. On the night of the killings, Bethany said between 4 and 4:20 a.m., when prosecutors say the murders happened, she heard what she thought was a firework and saw a spark on the ground from under her door, then heard Murphy barking. What could that have been? He didn't use a gun. What could that have been? A firework and a spark on the ground from under her door, then heard the dog barking. Kohberger was arrested, as you know, on December 30th at his parents' home in Pennsylvania, and there are more details on that. When he was arrested, he repeatedly probed investigators, asking why he was in custody and what they wanted to know from him. I mean, he knew. He just wanted to figure out what they knew. At the same time, he acted as though he had only peripheral knowledge of the quadruple homicide that had occurred in Moscow 1 month prior. Kohberger was brought to the Pennsylvania State Police Barracks, put in an interview room, and made small talk with cops, telling one detective that he looked familiar and looked like someone he used to know. Oh, so chummy, like he was with the judge the other day. I respectfully declined. Oh, you're such a good boy, Bryan. Yes, you're getting an A on the test of faking polite young man who wouldn't commit quadruple murder. It's amazing how this seems important to him. Kohberger said he, quote, understood why they were engaging in small talk, but would appreciate it if we could explain to him what he was doing there. The detective, whose face he had noticed, asked why he thought we were there. So the detective said to him, why do you think we're here? Kohberger responded he wanted the detective to tell him. The detective said we were there because of what occurred in Moscow, but did not provide further detail. Look, this is according to the police report. The detective then asked Kohberger if he watched the news. Kohberger responded, I do. I watch the news. The detective said they were there because of, quote, what happened in November just off the University of Idaho campus. Asked if Kohberger knew what that was, Kohberger replied, of course, elaborating when prompted that it was the incident we had been investigating for how long has it been? As if he didn't know. He said he was aware of a homicide because of a Wash U alert that he had received, He wasn't certain when he had gotten it. When asked by the detective if he wanted to talk about that, Kohberger replied, well, I think I would need a lawyer. It's basically confessing. If you're going to talk to me about that, I need a lawyer. Kohberger then asked if we would explain to him what we were there for specifically, and then added he was tired. Investigators had questions and things we hoped Kohberger would help us understand, the detective explained. Kohberger sat back and said he had the utmost respect for law enforcement. There he goes again. I respectfully decline. I'm a good boy, you see. But stated it was a constitutional right to speak to an attorney. Kohberger re-engaged again, however, and asked what questions we would have for him. He wanted to figure out what they knew. He was desperate to try to figure it out. What specifically we wanted to talk to him about and the reason. At other points in the chat, he talked about his interest in criminal justice, saying he thought about becoming a police officer but did not want to make the commitment unless he was absolutely sure We know that he sought an internship with the Pullman, Washington Police Department. That officer who interviewed him gave an interview this week saying he was not warm enough. He was not enough of a people person for them to give him the job. They could tell members of the community would not want to talk to him. So good call, Pullman, Washington cops. When asked what led him down the road of becoming a professor, Kohberger said it was because he loved being in college and stated knowledge was far more important to him than money. He also told cops in the room that he was raised Christian but was always a skeptic, except when confronted with the beauty of the natural world. Well, you're going to find out real soon what Christian beliefs are true, like a belief in heaven and hell. And guess where you're going? And it's probably going to be before you reach your 40th birthday, possibly sooner. The inmates that he was housed with are also on record here. The cops went and asked them questions about Kohberger. That's interesting. He was described by fellow inmates who encountered him in jail as, quote, highly intelligent. We heard that from his lab partner at DeSales, too, that talked about him being extremely smart, and everyone in the room knew it, including Kohberger. That he was polite. This is the inmates, back to them. But that he had, quote, annoying habits. Kohberger, they said, would wash his hands dozens of times each day, would spend 45 minutes to an hour in the shower, would be awake almost all night, and would only take a nap during the day. That is somewhat consistent with the story his lawyer was trying to weave about how he would go on drives in the middle of the night and stargaze. Now, we all understood she was saying that as his, quote, alibi, which that's not an alibi, as a measure of getting him off, but it's not hard to believe he actually did do those things. We know that he was casing the murder house around those hours prior to the murder, and it's possible Bryan Kohberger really did have an insomnia problem that he suffered from in jail, or it's possible the thought of facing the firing squad caused one for him. In any event, another inmate saying he really didn't sleep and he obsessively washed his hands. They said on one occasion, the fellow inmate overheard Kohberger video chatting with his mother, which the inmate said he did for hours a day. That's so annoying. How does he get to talk to his mother for over hours a day? Kaylee's never going to get to talk to her mother again. Maddie's never going to get to talk to her mother again. Ethan's never going to get to talk to his mother again. Xana's never going to get to talk to her mother again. How does Bryan Kohberger get to talk to his mother for hours on end via video chat from a jail cell? That shit better stop now that he's in maximum security. He listened to it, and the inmate who was watching sports in the neighboring cell, I think, said, "You suck," to one of the players on the team, at which point Kohberger immediately got up, put his face to the bars, and aggressively asked if the inmate was talking about him or his mother. Yeah, you're super protective of women, Bryan. The inmate said this was the only time he saw Kohberger lose his temper. One officer wrote, an inmate in the same facility stated he's a fucking weirdo, and that he wasn't worried. If he wasn't worried about the legal repercussions, he, the inmate, would have physically assaulted Kohberger. When asked if he thinks Kohberger is guilty, the inmate said, his eyes tell a story. And I think that's true. I mean, his most recent mugshot is extra creepy. I mean, you can see now he knows exactly what's about to happen to him. And he knows he's infamous. Look at that. Look at him staring so intently into the camera. He's trying to tell us something. It can't be I got away with it. At best, it's I got away with not telling you exactly why I did it. Oh, okay. Let that be of comfort to you as you're bent over and raped in prison and ultimately shivved, which is probably what's coming your way, buddy. Feel great about it until you feel nothing at all. That's it. He's now in the Idaho Max Security Prison. Brian Enton of News Nation went and toured it. This is the most severe correctional facility that they have in Idaho. It's housing some very dangerous criminals, including Chad Daybell of the Lori Vallow Daybell murder mystery. He was convicted of killing his ex-wife and the two children of his second wife, Lori Vallow Daybell. He's there. Thomas Creech is convicted of 5 murders. He's confessed to at least 26 others. That's Brian's new roommate. Well, prison mate. Enjoy that. The New York Post going so far as to report the first meal he likely had for dinner on Wednesday, if he made it back in time for dinner. Vegans would have been offered vegan barley casserole, baked beans, and canned fruit. If he's abandoned the whole vegan thing, he would have had hot dog salad and Jell-O pie. It's so satisfying to think of this guy having to eat Jell-O pie and canned fruit. Great. I'll end on this creepy detail. Eagle-eyed court watchers zoomed in on a drawing that was next to Bryan Kohberger at the hearing on Wednesday. And what they saw was a picture, it looks hand-drawn, of a square inside of which is a black heart. How fitting. Clearly he drew it, though he never glanced down at it or even moved it as he listened to the testimonials in court. The Post reporting, however, immediately after the hearing ended, one of Kohberger's attorneys was spotted scooping up the piece of paper. They cited NBC News for that. The lawyer appeared to ask the killer about the heart before smiling and taking the sketch with her. The back of the paper bore a handwritten note. It was not immediately clear what the two said to each other. How appropriate. A black heart. A dark heart full of nothing. No love, no sadness, no empathy, no regret, no hope, no joy, just nothing. That's what he said about himself in those earlier musings that he posted. It was clearly him, never officially confirmed, as a teenager. That he felt like just a piece of hamburger meat. That when his father hugged him, he felt nothing. He feels nothing for his mother, nor his father, nor those young people he murdered. Nothing. Which is why it was so brilliant how Olivia Gonsalves spoke to him as the nothing he is, as the joke he's become. You think you're so smart. Did you really think you could cover up the purchase of the knife with an Amazon gift card? That they wouldn't figure it out? You think you're so smart. You're so stupid. Who would leave behind the knife sheath? Who would forget to make a pattern out of turning off their phone when the wee hours of the morning came? I mean, he led the police directly to him, Mr. PhD student. And now he'll pay the price. It's not the price we wanted. Not yet. And we'll move on from this case and hope there's not another. It is important to remember the beautiful lives of those four gorgeous people in the truest sense of that word. You know, they make me want to be a little nicer, don't they? I pray every Sunday in church that I can find it within myself to be a little kinder, a little better, a little more forgiving. And you look at these four and they really do inspire you. Ethan Chapin, Madison Mogen, Kaylee Gonsalves, and Xana Kernodle. Thank you for being an example in how to live. So very deeply sorry for how your lives ended. We won't forget you. God bless them. God bless their families. And we'll talk to you all on Monday. Let me tell you about something that did not get a lot of news coverage. A major insurance provider, Aflac, confirmed that they were part of a massive data breach, which may have exposed personal information. You could have seen it on Ground News, the platform that cuts through the noise and sees what's being reported, and more importantly, what isn't. See, Ground News shows whether you are reading original reporting or just a repackaged press release. That kind of transparency makes all the difference. And you can scan the QR code on screen or go to groundnews.com/Megyn to follow the story for yourself. Ground News shows how Fox called it a cyber attack on a major insurer, while CBS News cushions the blow using words like may have had data stolen to downplay it. And many of the usual privacy watchdogs, totally silent. Ground News is independent, it's subscriber funded, and one of the few tools out there that actually puts you in control of what you see. Go to groundnews.com/Megyn to get 40% off the unlimited access Vantage plan. That's groundnews.com/Megyn.